Most people think spiritual awakening is liberation, but for most people, it becomes a prison. Not because the truth is too small, but because the truth is too big. They open the door to a larger self, take one step inside, and then run back to the life that was slowly suffocating them. Why? Because awakening shows you everything you've been avoiding. And the human mind is brilliant at escaping itself. Awakening is often romanticized as a moment of pure clarity, a sudden expansion of consciousness that frees you from your past and lifts you into a higher state of being. But in reality, awakening is only the doorway, not the destination. It is the first crack in the shell, the first opening of the inner eye, the first whisper of truth that cuts through the illusions you've lived inside for years. And once that door opens, the real struggle begins not with the world, not with other people, but with the parts of yourself you have buried, denied, rejected, or forgotten. Awakening exposes a shadow, and it is the confrontation with that shadow that determines whether you evolve or remain trapped at the threshold of your own potential. The shadow is not the dark side in the way people often imagine it. It is not evil, nor is it something to be feared or exiled. It is simply the aspects of yourself that your conscious identity could not hold. These parts were abandoned because they were painful, inconvenient, socially unacceptable, or too overwhelming to integrate at the time. Awakening brings them back into the light, not to punish you, but to complete you. And it is this returning, this rising of the forgotten self that makes the journey after awakening so difficult. When the shadow surfaces, it does not arrive gently. It arrives like a wave that has been building for years. Old wounds you thought you outgrew reappear with new intensity. Patterns you thought you broke suddenly tighten around you. Emotions you suppressed long ago rise with a force you cannot ignore. This is not regression, this is revelation. Awakening makes you aware of what has always been operating beneath the surface, shaping your choices, relationships, fears, and desires without your conscious permission. For many, this moment feels like a spiritual collapse. They ask, if I'm awakening, why does everything feel worse? But the truth is that awakening doesn't create the chaos, it reveals it. The turbulence was always there, hidden beneath layers of coping mechanisms, distractions, and identities constructed to keep you functioning. Awakening simply turns on the light in the room you've been walking through in the dark. Suddenly you see everything, the mess, the unresolved pain, the habits built from fear, the attachments built from insecurity, the dreams built from other people's expectations. This visibility is not comfortable. It is disorienting, humbling, and often terrifying. But it is also the beginning of genuine freedom. Facing the shadow requires immense courage. The human mind is designed to protect itself, not to transform itself. It will rationalize, deny, and distract in order to avoid discomfort. It will try to pull you back into old cycles because those cycles feel familiar. The shadow carries everything you were not ready to feel, and when it emerges, your first instinct is often to run. But running only delays the inevitable. What you avoid in the shadow grows stronger. What you confront in the shadow begins to dissolve. Awakening exposes the gap between who you truly are and who you learn to be. The shadow lives in that gap. To cross it, you must unlearn the false self, the persona you constructed to win approval, to stay safe, to fit in, to survive. You must examine the stories you inherited, the beliefs you swallowed without question, the emotional armor you built to protect the most sensitive parts of your inner world. This process feels like dismantling yourself, and in many ways it is. Awakening is not an addition, it is a subtraction. You remove everything that is not you so that your authentic nature can emerge. But this dismantling is not linear. You will move forward and backward, opening and closing, expanding and contracting. The shadow teaches through cycles, not straight lines. Each layer you uncover reveals another beneath it. Each truth you accept leads to a deeper truth waiting to be acknowledged. And with each confrontation, you reclaim a fragment of yourself that was lost. Integration is the art of gathering these fragments and welcoming them home, one piece at a time. The struggle after awakening is not a punishment, but a purification. It is the process of becoming whole. It is the moment when your outer life begins to align with your inner truth. It is the invitation to move beyond spiritual ideals and into embodied wisdom. It is the challenge of choosing authenticity over comfort, truth over illusion, presence over avoidance. And though the path may be steep and the shadow may feel overwhelming, every step toward it expands your consciousness, strengthens your soul, and deepens your connection to the life you were meant to live. Most people become trapped because they fear the collapse of their old identity more than they desire their new one. This fear is not superficial or irrational. It is deeply rooted in the psychological structures that hold a person's sense of self together. The identity you carry, no matter how limiting, painful, or outdated it may be, has given you a sense of continuity, predictability, and stability. It has shaped the way you navigate the world, protect yourself, and interpret your experiences. Losing that identity feels like losing the ground beneath your feet, like stepping into an unknown terrain without a map, without armor, without the familiar voice that once told you who you were supposed to be. The old identity is built over years of conditioning, relationships, expectations, wounds, and survival strategies. It becomes a kind of psychological home, even if that home is cramped, dim, or suffocating. It is what you know. It is what others expect of you. It is what you have repeated so often that it feels like truth. When awakening begins to loosen the walls of that identity, people feel destabilized. They experience a kind of emotional vertigo. Who am I if I'm not the person I've always performed? What happens if I let go of the roles that kept me accepted, safe, or understood? What if changing means losing the life I've built, even if that life no longer fits who I am becoming? This internal conflict creates a powerful psychological tension. On one hand, the new self calls with a quiet but persistent voice, a whisper of authenticity, integrity, and inner freedom. On the other hand, the old self clings tightly, warning that change might lead to rejection, failure, or chaos. The mind is far more devoted to familiarity than to possibility. It chooses patterns over evolution because patterns feel predictable, and predictability to the human psyche feels like safety. The collapse of an old identity is not a small event, it is a symbolic death. Everything that once defined you, your beliefs, your persona, your habits, your relationships, your emotional responses begins to dissolve. And this dissolution can feel like losing control. Most people are not afraid of becoming better. They are afraid of losing the version of themselves that has kept them functional. The fear is not of the new self, but of the empty space in between, the liminal zone where nothing is certain and everything feels vulnerable. This is why people often sabotage their own growth. They take a few steps toward transformation and then quickly retreat. They feel the pull of a new direction but hold on tightly to old behaviors. They glimpse a truer version of themselves and then shut down the moment it threatens the roles they've always played. The journey toward a new identity requires stepping into ambiguity, and ambiguity is where the ego feels most threatened. The ego would rather remain in a prison it knows than walk through a door into a room it has never seen. The fear of identity collapse also shows up in relationships. When a person begins to change, the people around them often resist that change. They react, consciously or unconsciously, to maintain the version of you that fits their needs and expectations. This social pressure reinforces the fear. If I evolve, I might be misunderstood, criticized, abandoned, or judged. So many people stay trapped, not because they lack the desire to grow, but because growth threatens the structure of their entire relational world. Even spiritual or psychological insight is not enough to break this trap. A person can understand their patterns, see their limitations, recognize their wounds, and still cling to the identity built from them. Knowledge does not equal transformation. Identity is emotional, not intellectual. Letting go of who you have been requires a kind of inner surrender, a willingness to feel lost for a while, a willingness to trust something deeper than your familiar persona. This surrender is terrifying, especially for those who built their identity as a defense against past pain. Most people do not realize that their identity was formed in response to old circumstances that no longer exist. They continue acting from outdated scripts. They hold on to versions of themselves that were necessary then but are restrictive now. The tragedy is not that they cannot change, but that they believe change will destroy them. In reality, the collapse of the old identity is not destruction, but liberation. It is the breaking of psychological walls that have long kept the soul constrained. But until a person can embrace uncertainty, until they can tolerate the discomfort of becoming, until they can trust that there is something on the other side of the collapse, they remain anchored to a self they have already outgrown. Spiritual clarity is often mistaken for freedom. People pursue it as if understanding a truth, seeing the patterns of life, or experiencing a sudden illumination can automatically release them from their suffering, their limitations, and their inner conflicts. They imagine that once they see clearly, the illusions and obstacles that have held them back will dissolve on their own. But spiritual clarity alone is not liberation. It is a necessary beginning, a map that shows the terrain of your inner world, but it is not the journey itself. True freedom comes not from clarity alone, but from what you do with that clarity, the conscious integration of what you discover about yourself into every aspect of your being. When a person awakens or gains insight into their deeper nature, they often feel a momentary rush of understanding. They may recognize the patterns that have shaped their life, the recurring behaviors, the wounds that have influenced their choices, or the illusions they have been living under. There is a sense of expansion, a temporary lightness, as if the truth itself could lift the weight of a lifetime. And yet, without integration, this clarity remains abstract. It is knowledge that exists in the mind, but has not yet touched the body, the emotions, or the habitual ways of being. It is an idea, not a lived experience. Integration is what transforms insight into transformation. It is the process of taking the truths you encounter and weaving them into the fabric of your life. When you integrate what you discover, you begin to recognize not just the patterns of your past, but also the mechanisms that keep them alive. You see the triggers, the unconscious reactions, the defensive structures, and the attachments that perpetuate suffering. You do not simply know that a behavior is harmful. You learn to observe it in real time, to feel it without being controlled by it, and to respond consciously rather than reactively. Integration is embodied. It requires patience, practice, and the courage to confront the discomfort of change. The process of integration is often slower and more demanding than the moment of clarity itself. Clarity can arrive suddenly, but integration is gradual. It requires facing parts of yourself that you may have ignored, denied, or suppressed. These are the traits, impulses, and emotions that your conscious mind finds inconvenient or painful. Spiritual clarity may reveal them. But unless you confront and accept them, you remain trapped in the very patterns you hope to escape. True freedom comes when you can sit with your inner contradictions, your fears, and your unresolved pain without fleeing, justifying, or suppressing them. Another crucial aspect of integration is learning to apply insight in the ordinary circumstances of life. Spiritual clarity may illuminate profound truths, but if they remain in meditation, contemplation, or philosophical understanding, they do not alter the dynamics of daily existence. Integration demands that you bring this awareness into relationships, work, habits, and decisions. It is the act of living what you know, not just understanding it. This is why so many people experience awakening but continue to struggle with the same patterns. Clarity is there, but it has not been translated into action, into behavior, into a new way of being that honors what has been discovered. Integration also involves reconciliation with the parts of yourself that clarity exposes. Awakening often uncovers the shadow, the hidden, rejected, or painful aspects of your personality. It is tempting to reject these discoveries, to cling to the idealized version of yourself that spiritual insight often promises. But rejecting the shadow only reinforces the very limitations that clarity reveals. True integration requires acceptance, recognizing these parts of yourself, learning from them, and transforming your relationship with them. When you integrate, you stop battling your inner world and start working with it, allowing it to guide, inform, and balance you. Finally, integration is not a one-time achievement. It is an ongoing practice. Every moment presents an opportunity to apply insight, to test understanding, and to refine behavior. Spiritual clarity may open the door, but integration is the living, breathing work of walking through it, learning the rhythms of the womb and inhabiting a more authentic self. Without integration, clarity can even become a source of frustration, a constant reminder of the gap between what you know and what you live. But with integration, clarity becomes the foundation for freedom, the guide for authentic growth, and the lens through which life itself becomes a teacher. Many people approach the idea of spiritual awakening or personal growth with an expectation of transcendence without transformation. They desire the light, the feeling of liberation, peace, and elevated consciousness without being willing to face the darkness that resides within them. This desire is understandable. The light is alluring, inspiring, and comforting, while the darkness is frightening, uncomfortable, and often destabilizing. Yet the two cannot be separated. True growth and freedom are not achieved by merely seeking the illumination of insight. They require the courageous engagement with the shadow, the uncomfortable, and the hidden aspects of oneself that most people spend a lifetime avoiding. The darkness within each person is not a moral failing or an inherently destructive force. It is composed of the parts of ourselves that we have rejected, ignored, or denied because they felt painful, unacceptable, or socially inconvenient. It is the fear, the anger, the jealousy, the grief, the unresolved trauma, and the patterns of self-sabotage that lie beneath the surface of consciousness. These elements exist in all of us, shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and emotional responses in ways we rarely acknowledge. To seek only the light while ignoring the darkness is to pursue half a truth, to attempt to soar while leaving essential wings behind. People stay stuck at this point because the process of confronting the darkness is inherently challenging. Facing the shadow means examining the aspects of yourself that you have hidden not only from others, but from yourself. It means recognizing uncomfortable truths, admitting responsibility for patterns that have caused pain, and acknowledging emotions that you may have long buried. It is a process that requires honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to feel deeply without immediately trying to fix, escape, or justify. Most people, understandably, are not prepared to endure such inner confrontation, and so they remain at the threshold of transformation, gazing at the light but unwilling to step fully into the complexity of their inner world. This avoidance is reinforced by the common cultural narratives around spirituality and self-improvement. Many teachings emphasize positivity, visualization, and aspiration toward higher states of being, often neglecting the equally important task of shadow work. As a result, people internalize the idea that awakening should be effortless and uplifting. When the inevitable pain, discomfort, and inner resistance arise, they assume that something is wrong with them or that they have failed, rather than recognizing that these challenges are the natural and necessary components of transformation. The desire for transcendence without transformation is fueled by this misunderstanding, and the cycle of avoidance becomes self-perpetuating. The consequences of seeking light without confronting darkness are profound. People may attain moments of clarity, fleeting joy, or intellectual understanding of spiritual truths, but these experiences remain superficial if they are not grounded in self-integration. Without engaging with the darkness, individuals often repeat the same patterns of thought, behavior, and emotional reaction. They may feel inspired one day and defeated the next, oscillating between aspiration and stagnation. Their personal growth becomes fragmented as they attempt to embrace the parts of themselves that feel safe while leaving the uncomfortable aspects unexamined. The transformation they seek remains incomplete, and the light they crave becomes a mirror of what is missing rather than a reflection of what has been fully realized. Confronting the darkness requires patience and commitment. It requires sitting with discomfort, observing inner impulses without judgment, and gradually bringing awareness to the parts of oneself that have been hidden. It demands that the person recognize their limitations, acknowledge past mistakes, and explore the layers of conditioning and trauma that have shaped their identity. This is the work of transformation. It is not a momentary experience, but a continuous process of discovery, integration, and refinement. Every encounter with the shadow deepens self-awareness and fosters authenticity, allowing the light to emerge not as a superficial state, but as a living, embodied quality that pervades all aspects of being. Ultimately, those who remain trapped in the pursuit of light alone are often caught in a cycle of longing and avoidance. They seek transcendence, inspiration, or spiritual elevation without accepting the necessary inner labor that comes with it. They may meditate, read, or contemplate lofty ideals, but if they do not engage with their own inner darkness, the insights they gain remain theoretical, disconnected from their lived experience. True illumination cannot exist apart from self-transformation. The two are inseparable. Light without darkness is incomplete, and transformation without acknowledgement of the shadow is impossible. Freedom is often misunderstood as the absence of struggle, the elimination of pain, or the attainment of a life where everything feels effortless and comfortable. Many people chase external circumstances that promise relief, security, or pleasure, believing that liberation is something to be found outside of themselves. Yet true freedom is never external. It is not the removal of obstacles or the avoidance of discomfort. Freedom is an inward journey, a confrontation with the self, and a willingness to face what has been long ignored or denied. It only comes when a person stops running from discomfort and begins to listen to the subtle, persistent messages of their inner wounds, those hidden parts of themselves that have been aching for attention, understanding, and healing. Discomfort is not a sign of failure or weakness. It is a guidepost. Every ache, every anxiety, every unresolved grief and tension within the body or mind is pointing to a place that needs to be addressed. For much of life, people learn to numb, avoid, or distract themselves from these sensations. They fill the silence with noise, the emptiness with activity, and the pain with denial. This is the trap. By constantly escaping discomfort, they cut themselves off from the very source of growth, insight, and liberation that exists within them. Avoidance provides temporary relief, but it keeps them chained to the unresolved narratives and unhealed wounds that continue to shape their choices and behaviors. Listening to inner wounds requires courage because it demands vulnerability. These wounds often carry shame, fear, or guilt that a person has been trained to suppress. The moment you stop running and turn inward, you encounter layers of emotion and memory that you may have buried for years, sometimes decades. Perhaps it is the grief of a loss never fully mourned, the anger of being wronged without reprieve, the fear of inadequacy that has been quietly shaping every decision, or the patterns of self-sabotage that keep repeating across relationships and opportunities. To truly listen to these wounds, one must allow themselves to feel the intensity of these experiences without judgment or resistance, to recognize that the discomfort itself is not the enemy, but a messenger of deeper truths. The inner wounds carry lessons that the conscious mind often cannot see. They reveal patterns, unconscious beliefs, and conditioned behaviors that have dictated the course of life. For example, a persistent sense of insecurity may point to unmet needs in childhood or repeated experiences of neglect or invalidation. Chronic anger may reveal boundaries that were violated or emotions that were repressed. Loneliness may indicate a disconnect between authentic desires and social conformity. Each wound carries information. It is the body and psyche's way of signaling that something requires attention, reflection, and transformation. The act of listening is an acknowledgement that these experiences are valid, that they have meaning, and that they can guide a person toward liberation if approached consciously. Stopping the escape also requires the willingness to confront fear. Fear is often the reason people avoid their discomfort in the first place. The mind warns that looking too deeply, feeling too fully, or confronting certain truths might be unbearable, that it will overwhelm, destabilize, or destroy. But this fear is precisely the threshold of freedom. Every moment of avoidance strengthens the chains. Every moment of conscious engagement loosens them. Listening to what the inner wounds are teaching is an act of courage, of breaking the habitual flight response and choosing presence over avoidance. Integration of these lessons transforms suffering into insight. When a person truly hears the message of their inner wounds, they begin to recognize the ways they have been repeating old patterns unconsciously. They understand how fear, shame, or unresolved trauma has shaped their interactions, decisions, and self-perception. With this awareness comes choice. The moment you are no longer unconsciously driven by pain, you gain the ability to act from a place of conscious clarity rather than habitual reactivity. You reclaim agency over your life because you no longer need to hide from your own inner truths. Ultimately, freedom emerges not as a state of comfort, but as a state of alignment. By ceasing the endless escape from discomfort and attentively listening to the guidance of inner wounds, a person begins to dissolve the internal barriers that have kept them constrained. They learn to embrace the fullness of themselves, the light and the shadow, the joy and the pain, the clarity and the confusion. Each wound, once recognized and understood, becomes a doorway into deeper self-awareness, emotional resilience, and authentic presence. It is this conscious engagement with the inner landscape that allows the mind, heart, and soul to move without the weight of unresolved patterns. And it is here, in this fearless listening, that true freedom begins to emerge.